A Tyrannosaurus rex was having a typical day, just wandering through a tropical paradise in the Yucatan Peninsula. Then the sky shifted. A blazing fireball, screaming through the atmosphere at an incredible 72,000 kilometers per hour, tore through the air. This was an asteroid, roughly 10 to 15 kilometers wide, which had been drifting through the void of space for eons. 66 million years ago, during the Cretaceous Paleogene or KP boundary, the world changed in a single heartbeat. What happens when the world's most dominant species is erased not by a slow decline, but by 3 distinct overlapping waves of death in a single day? Today, we're going to reconstruct the final 24 hours of the dinosaurs with scientific precision and visceral detail. That ordinary day for the T-Rex became a blinding light, and that same tropical paradise became a furnace in an instant. Now, let's consider the scale of the object tearing through the atmosphere. This wasn't just a rock. The asteroid was as big as Mount Everest. To put that in perspective, if it landed in a modern city, the entire skyline would be a mere speck beneath it. It was screaming toward the planet at a speed between 10 and 30 kilometers per second. Because of the sheer friction of the air, just before impact, the asteroid could have been as hot as the surface of the sun. Everything collided at a single, precise point, just off the shore of the Yucatan Peninsula in modern-day Mexico. The energy released in that microsecond was beyond comprehension, punching a hole in the Earth's crust that created the Chicxulub crater, which spans 200 kilometers. It is a scar of absolute destruction. But this impact was only the trigger. While the crater marks where it started, a far more terrifying sequence is about to begin. Specifically, a rain of molten glass that will turn the entire atmosphere into a global oven. Everything changed in a heartbeat. The moment of contact wasn't just a collision, it was a cosmic explosion. The energy released was equivalent to detonating billions of nuclear weapons simultaneously, a force so violent that it triggered a global earthquake felt as far as modern-day Indonesia. At the ground zero of the Yucatan, the physics were nightmarish. The asteroid punched a crater 25 kilometers deep and 100 kilometers wide into the Earth's crust. For a few seconds, the solid rock of the planet actually went molten and splashed up like water. But for the animals nearby, the impact was a wall of heat. Thermal radiation from the impact burned everything within a 1,500-kilometer radius. If you were standing within 1,000 miles of the impact, you didn't just die, you were incinerated instantly. And then the ocean reacted. Because the impact happened in the shallow waters of the Gulf of Mexico, the ocean was pushed back by the immense force, only to come rushing back in. This created enormous tidal waves, hundreds of meters high. These tsunamis tore across the Proto-Caribbean and Atlantic basins, erasing entire coastlines in minutes. If you can picture a wave the size of a skyscraper, that is what hit the shores. It's a scale of destruction that is almost impossible to wrap our heads around, right? So, how do we actually know this happened? The answer is hidden in a thin layer of sediment known as the KPG boundary. This is the exact geological record point where dinosaurs disappeared from the fossil record, marking the violent transition from the Mesozoic to the Cenozoic era. If you look at this boundary clay, you'll find something impossible. It contains 200 times the amount of iridium normally expected on Earth's crust. Now, iridium is an element abundant in asteroids, meteorites, and comets, but it is incredibly rare on Earth's surface. Finding this specific element scattered across the globe at the KPG boundary supports the asteroid theory with overwhelming evidence. It's a chilling realization. A thin layer of dust in the soil tells a story of global murder. We aren't just looking at rocks. We are looking at the forensic evidence of a planetary massacre. Something happened during the impact that was even more terrifying than the initial explosion. The asteroid didn't just punch a hole in the ground. It acted like a massive cosmic vacuum, pulling the Earth's crust upward. 25 trillion metric tons of debris, about 60 times the mass of the asteroid itself, were exploded into the atmosphere. Think about that scale. We are talking about chunks of molten Earth crust being shot upward like shrapnel on a global scale. But it wasn't just large rocks. The heat was so intense that it turned the Yucatan granitic basement into vaporized material. The result was a silicate dust that remained suspended in the atmosphere, mixing with huge amounts of soot and carbon dioxide from the wildfires that were already beginning to rage. The air itself was becoming a thick, suffocating shroud. Because this debris was shot so high into space, it had to eventually fall back down. And that is where the nightmare truly begins. Across the globe, the distance didn't matter. In North Dakota, USA, the Earth didn't just shake, it shattered. Geologists have uncovered a fossilized mass grave there, a terrifying snapshot of the final moments. Inside this single layer of sediment, they found a chaotic jumble of life: fish, burned tree trunks, and conifer branches. There were mammals, insects, and even the massive bones of a mosasaur. Most striking of all was a partial triceratops carcass, trapped in the same grave as the smallest creatures. What makes this discovery so haunting is what was mixed in with the bodies. The researchers found tektites and microtektites, tiny, frozen droplets of molten glass that had rained down from space. These glass beads were the calling card of the apocalypse, raining down on a triceratops and a fish in the same instant. It reveals a terrifying reality. Whether you were a king of the land or a creature of the deep, you were caught in the same terminal trap. But survival of this heat was only the beginning of the nightmare, because a sudden darkness was already beginning to settle over the world. High in the atmosphere, the debris from the molten Earth crust began to coalesce into tektites. These droplets of natural glass cooled as they fell, but they didn't stay cool for long. As these glass and rock fragments passed back through the atmosphere, they heated up to hundreds of degrees Celsius. For about 15 minutes following the impact, the entire planet was covered in a torrential storm of fire rain. It was essentially burning hail made of superheated rocks. If you were a dinosaur, you wouldn't have known where to hide. The sky literally turned into a furnace. This fire rain had a devastating effect. Because the falling debris was so superheated, it ignited the vegetation. The result was a global incineration that destroyed 70% of the world's forests. 70%. That is an almost total wipeout of the world's greenery. The world's most dominant predators were now facing a world that was literally burning down around them. Once the fire rain ceased, the world didn't return to the order of the tropical paradise. Instead, a massive cloud of dust and aerosols blanketed Earth, creating a dense gray shroud that obscured the sun. This buildup of gases and particle debris in the atmosphere blocked out the sun, plunging the planet into a terrifying nuclear winter. Do you actually wonder what happens to a world without light? Everything became a freezing, lightless apocalypse. This fine-grained ejecta reduced the amount of solar radiation reaching the surface, and the result was a brutal, sudden temperature drop. The impact winter lasted at least 15 years. With no sun, plants were unable to photosynthesize, leading to the collapse of terrestrial and marine food chains. The giants who had survived the initial heat and the glass rain were now facing a slow, cold starvation in a world where the very foundation of life had vanished. 3/4 of life on Earth was erased in a heartbeat. Approximately 75% of all species were wiped out in this mass extinction event, making it one of the largest in history, second only to the Permian extinction. But if the giants were gone, who was left? A small sliver of avian dinosaurs survived, becoming the direct ancestors of modern birds. Specifically, beaked birds had a survival advantage because they could dig out seeds from the ground, giving them a more varied diet than non-beaked birds. Meanwhile, the survivors list is even stranger. Mammals smaller than 10 centimeters survived the extinction because they could hide underground, insulating them from the atmosphere's cold and requiring far less food. The platypus is a perfect example of a mammal that coexisted with dinosaurs and others who survived the KPG extinction. And then there are the armored survivors. About 80% of the known turtle species and crocodilians survived the KPG extinction. Crocodilians likely made it through thanks to their diverse diets and an incredible ability to survive without food for over a year. 16 million years of dominance vanished in a single day. When we look at the geological record, we look at a brutal reality. All terrestrial and marine dinosaurs died out as a result of the impact and the aftermath. The very traits that made them the kings of their world, their massive size and power, became their death warrant. Being large was a disadvantage, as they required more food, space, and resources that simply ceased to exist in a world of darkness and cold. While non-avian dinosaurs and pterosaurs were wiped extinct, the biological clock of Earth was reset for the small and the resourceful. The age of the dinosaurs ended, clearing the path for mammals and the birds we see today. The biological reality is that in the face of cosmic chaos, the strongest are often the most fragile.